Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for our October Policy Action Zoom meeting. My name is Jeff Garris. I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We're really excited about this new series that we started just last month. Every third Thursday of the month at 1 p.m., we will be hosting these Zoom meetings to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into some policy issues that are impacting the lives of Pennsylvanians, policies that we'd like to see enacted, because they'll allow all Pennsylvanians to not just survive, but to thrive. We talked last month, it was kind of our initial meeting. We talked about education funding and talked about the state budget. This month, we're taking a special look at an important election coming up in about 2.5 weeks from now, on November 7th. There are local races going on across Pennsylvania, but there are also some important statewide judicial races going on. And we're going to be talking about that today. I'm really pleased to be joined here by my friends and colleagues at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We'll introduce our speakers in just a moment, but a little bit of housekeeping quickly. If you have a question or comment, feel free to type that into the chat. If you would like to ask a question directly, you can just say question in the chat and I'll call on you. We'll make sure you can unmute your lines so that you can ask questions as we have time for those. If you need any technical support, if you have any problems, please type those in the chat. And my colleague, Kirsten Snow, our communications director, and I will try to address those and help you out with that. Our guests today are Mark Steer, who is the executive director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Mark's going to be talking about some of the important things that the court system in Pennsylvania does, and specifically the state Supreme Court. We're then going to hear from a special guest speaker today, Deborah Gross, the Executive Director of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. And then kind of wrapping up our speakers today will be Susan Gobreski, my friend and colleague here, our Senior Advisor at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We're really excited to have all of you here today. We are recording this meeting, so anything that you share or want to say out loud, that'll be part of the recording, which we then make available to folks who wanted to be here but had other reasons they couldn't make it today. On that note, let me turn it over to Mark Steer. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for the panelists who agreed to join us today. I just want to introduce the organization and tell you why we care about court elections. As many of you know, Pennsylvania Policy Center is a new organization. We really just went into business on May 1st. But we are the new Pennsylvania affiliate of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We focus on a lot of issues, but especially on issues of economic equality, education fairness, and the budget. So why are we talking about the courts today? Well, the basic fact is the way politics works in America and in Pennsylvania, almost any issue of public policy of any importance ultimately comes up before our courts. And that's certainly true in Pennsylvania. That's one thing. And the other thing is the most important issue that comes before the courts is the functioning of our democracy. If we're going to have economic justice, if we're going to have real equality of opportunity, which requires full and fair funding of our schools, it's only going to happen if the people are able to have an impact on their government. And we know that all through this country and at the federal level, there have been attacks on democracy. There's been gerrymandering here and elsewhere. There have been efforts to change the structure of government that inside that empowers minorities. We see that with the Senate filibuster in Congress. We see that in the disputes about who's going to be the Speaker of the House, where a small minority of people seem to be making decisions for the whole House of Representatives, or holding it hostage until they get their way. The courts play an absolutely critical role in Pennsylvania in protecting our democracy. They have been the bulwark that has been protecting our right to vote and ensuring that the rules that we follow when we vote are fair to everyone, and that when there's an important question about how a ballot should be counted or whether a ballot should be counted, that the most important consideration is allowing people's voices to be heard in elections. That's what our Constitution says, and we need a Supreme Court that's going to uphold that provision of the Constitution. They've been the bulwark against gerrymandering, which has made our legislature less responsible to and our U.S. congressional delegation less responsible to the people. So if we want economic equality and education justice, we need to protect our democracy. The courts does that. Second, the right to abortion may ultimately come before the courts of Pennsylvania, in particular our Supreme Court. That's a critical right for all of us, particularly for women. And it's not just a matter of women's lives, it's about women's full participation. It's about their lives in general, their ability to fully participate in our economy and our polity. Supreme Court is going to deal with that issue. And then education equality itself. Many of you know that last year the Commonwealth Court Pennsylvania ruled that our system of funding public schools was unconstitutional. That has not been appealed to the Supreme Court, but it could come to the Supreme Court. It could come back to Commonwealth Court. That decision is critical in our ability to get full and fair funding of our schools, and that's critical to economic prosperity for all of us and equal opportunity. Again, that comes before the court. And that's why we're so concerned about the courts, and that's why we're sponsoring this event today. All of these issues I talked about are on the ballot on Election Day next month. We are a C3 organization. We're not going to tell you who to vote for, but we're going to tell you to vote. And we're going to tell you have to vote if you care about these issues. That's why we're here today, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Gross, who is from Pennsylvania for Modern Courts. I think she's the executive director, although I'm never good at remembering titles. Deborah was a great ally of ours in fighting judicial gerrymandering as part of the JIPA campaign. And we're always pleased when we can work with her, and we're always pleased to have her because she really is an expert on the courts in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to, so I wasn't originally going to share a screen, but since we still have the speaker thing up, I'm going to put a few slides on and talk a little bit about the court system. But I want to thank you very much for including us, right? As Mark said, this election is really important. And to me, we only have 20% turnout historically for judicial elections because they're in odd numbered years. So we are allowing the minority to make the decision for the majority. So that's not what democracy is. And if we want, and to support our democracy, we need to exercise our right to vote. So to me, first and foremost, we have to get people out to vote. And that's all I can say because I am too a 501c3, can't register anybody to vote. But yes, it's really important. But beyond that, the court system, our third branch of government, is what we count on these days to help with the checks and balances. And I'm going to just show my screen for my famous picture of the court system. Does that work, or do I need to do a show? I need to do something else. Let's see.
That works.
Slideshow, and from current slide. Okay, that should work. That's better. Okay, so Pennsylvania, we have this triangular picture of our Supreme Court. And I want to just spend a little time on it because it's really important. And for a few reasons, okay? Our top court is our Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We have 7 justices on this court. As everybody knows right now, there's 1 vacancy. So there is an election for between 2 candidates. The president judge of our Pennsylvania Supreme Court is a female justice, first female president judge in the history of our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, 300 years. Really remarkable, really wonderful. Pennsylvania judicial elections, we elect judges for 10 years, and then there are retention elections, okay? When there is a vacancy, which there is, the governor could appoint somebody. It would be for a temporary term until the next judicial election. We don't have emergency judicial elections like for other political positions. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is, in essence, the ultimate authority on Pennsylvania law. We have judges or decisions or inquiries, I'll say, from federal courts, such as the U.S. Supreme Court, the circuit courts, sending, there's a formal legal language, but I'll just use sending letters of inquiry, I'll say, it's not the formal terminology, to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sometimes, asking them how they would rule on this issue if it came before them. And the Supreme Court does respond these days to that. So it is the ultimate authority. The problem, I will say, is that it doesn't take that many cases. Doesn't deal with it. It handles maybe or issues maybe, a few hundred decisions a year, 300 to 500 decisions, depending on the year. And so there are other courts in our appellate court system in Pennsylvania that also have, in my mind, ultimate authority on Pennsylvania law. So while I say we should focus on the Supreme Court, do not go into the voters' booth and only vote for the Supreme Court candidates. There are two other appellate courts that have candidates and have vacancies, and to me, they are just as important. So that's the message I've been trying to communicate. So, under our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, as you see, we have the intermediate appellate courts. They're comprised of the Commonwealth Court and the Superior Court. The Commonwealth Court, I'm going to see if I can slide along a little bit. The Commonwealth Court has 9 judges. It can be a court where cases are originally filed or where cases are appealed with respect to matters relating to state, local, city, governmental issues, I will say. It was created because our Superior Court, which is our other appellate, intermediate appellate court, is so busy. The goal was to relieve some of the work of the Superior Court. There is one spot on this Commonwealth Court that is vacant. That vacancy came about because the prior Commonwealth Court judge ran for the Supreme Court. And he won. So it is important that we keep in mind that when we elect somebody to one of these intermediate appellate courts, they are often the stepping stones to our Supreme Court, right? So we need to put as much emphasis on on who we elect and their qualifications for the intermediate appellate courts as to the Supreme Court. Mark referenced the decision by the Commonwealth Court earlier this year on education. It was a remarkable decision. It was written by President Judge Jubileer. She held months of trial, issued a remarkable decision, an 800-page decision, in fact, holding that the way Pennsylvania funds its education is unconstitutional. Was not appealed, which is great. So it is the law of the land. An issue could come back through the pipeline, I will say, relating to how funding occurs right now, or whether the legislature actually follows the court's decision. But the holding of the constitutionality of the current funding is set. It shouldn't be overturned unless there's some extreme abuse of discretion. So we do have that, going for us, but yet we don't have the funding right now from the legislature to support, for an increase to the funding. The current Superior Court has 15 judges, and there are 2 seats that are open for election. The Superior Court is a court that is our busiest, has over 5,000 appeals a year. It is an automatic right of appeal. So whereas I discussed the Supreme Court, it has this discretion to take cases on appeal. Sometimes even the Supreme Court may not take a case because it could be too hot potato, I'll say. There was but the Superior Court has to take every appeal. And so they sit in 3-judge panels typically. So even though we have 15 judges, there is a mix and match, and it's just a roll of a wheel as to how the makeup of the panel. So they work with each other, which is, and there may once in a while, but not too frequently, be an en banc panel of the Superior Court that hears a matter after an initial decision by the 3-judge Superior Court panel. But it is, every case can be appealed to this court. It handles civil, family, business, commercial disputes, guardianship disputes, criminal disputes. I mean, it is, the busiest court, they claim in the country, but it's definitely the busiest court, appellate court we have. So the other important factor about our court system is that we have, so there are elections, I'm not going to go into them, but there are court of common pleas elections depending on what county you're in. There are municipal court elections depending on what county. Municipal court is only in Philadelphia. There are magisterial district court elections if you are outside of Philadelphia. Okay, so that's, to me, the courts are, you need to understand what types of cases they handle. And I actually wanted to share with you, if I can figure out how to do this, also this amazing resource that just, can you see this? Is this working? Anybody?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine, great. Sorry. SpotlightPA.org/elections. They're also a 501c3. Just put up an interactive website on their website about information about the judicial elections. So I'm going to just show you what it looks like. It starts at Pennsylvania elections, tells you about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Commonwealth Court, Superior Court. You scroll down, gives you different election guides. Scroll down more, talks about how, it has this tool. And where's the tool? So
sorry to interrupt. We're looking at your slideshow. I'm not sure if you mean to be sharing a different website.
Yeah, I think it's just the slide right now.
Okay, so wait, I have to stop sharing my slide. Hold on. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. I thought we were asking about the slides.
Okay, hold on. That means I have to go back to the other. I apologize. Thought I was, but I wasn't. I guess I forgot you have to keep. Okay, so now, does that work? Do you have it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the spotlightpa.org/elections, which is an amazing reference tool, I will say, which is really important to help you understand the courts, who's running, and the importance of the courts. And it talks about how they have a tool. It talks about why judges matter. It gives a little bit of background on the courts, about topics. It talks about the Commonwealth Court, the Superior Court, the Supreme Court. So it's a recent resource. So I wanted to just bring it to everybody's attention as that it's out there, and I would highly recommend it. Okay, so that's a little bit about the courts. The other thing is, like, how do you decide who to vote for, right? People, the feedback that we have heard frequently is that people don't vote because they don't know have any information about the judges. It's a little intimidating. How do you decide who to vote for? Do you go by name? What type of information is out there? So first, judges are limited in the types of questions they can answer and the information they can provide. There's a code of judicial conduct, which says that they can't answer a question on any matter which will be before them, right? While we have, partisan elections, judges need to be impartial and independent in making decisions. So it is it's quite a pressure on them as to how they can answer questions, what they can say. Sometimes we want more information from a judge than they can provide. So what I say is, you can learn a lot about the judges based on their answers to questionnaires, based on their prior decisions. But that also requires you to do a lot of work. So there are organizations that have done work on done the legwork for you, I will say. So for this appellate court candidates, the Pennsylvania Bar Association has an investigative committee. It makes recommendations. They're either recommendations, not recommendations, highly recommended. What they base their decisions on are, I'm going to give you a few different factors, right? The candidate's legal experience. So is the candidate a lawyer? What types of law did the candidate practice, right? What types of cases has the candidate handled? Has that candidate been disciplined? and I can't say who are the candidates' clients because everybody's entitled to represent. Sometimes you represent. I'm an attorney, so sometimes you represent clients that you don't necessarily believe in or believe their cause, but they are entitled to representation. So I have frequently represented them under in the best fashion possible, upholding the law, making the best arguments. If it's an argument that I personally don't feel comfortable making, I will let my client know that. So, that's a problem, another push and pull. But has the client had courtroom experience, right? Has the candidate had courtroom experience? Has a candidate written? So our appellate court judges do a lot of writing, right? They don't have trials, but for the Commonwealth Court, that has a trial. And it's not a jury trial, that's a bench trial. So, does that judge have some kind of trial experience? For, the appellate courts, has that candidate argued before the appellate court? So judicial, the candidate's legal and judicial experience is important. How do you evaluate the candidate's reputation for fairness and integrity? Well, that's something that the Bar Association looks into. When they're an attorney, if there is an issue, there is an attorney disciplinary board. Even as a judge, if there is an issue, there is a judicial conduct board. There are, people who have been before the judges file complaints. There's an investigative process, and the judicial conduct board makes a decision as to whether to prosecute or not prosecute that judge's conduct. We also evaluate, the Bar Association also evaluates the candidate's community involvement and public service. I feel that is a tremendously important factor. Judges are public servants. I know as a judge, they give back, but do they also participate in their community in some fashion? And that gives you an indication of I'll say where their heart is, and what causes they support. So, PMC does a lot of civics education programming. We have so many judges who reach out to us and say, can we teach in the classroom? That's amazing. That should be, across the board, but not everybody does it. There's also, you also look into the candidates, like ongoing educational and professional activities. Does the candidate teach in an independent, nonpartisan environment? Does the candidate teach other judges? Is the candidate a mentor for other judges? And then finally, you can also look at the candidate's decisions. So it's a lot, and I understand that, but if you go on the pacourts.us website, you could actually search for decisions by the appellate court candidates. If a individual is running for an appellate court and is a court of common pleas judge, they don't have to issue a decision necessarily unless it's appealed. So the process in Pennsylvania is that the court could issue an order. If the case is appealed, the court has then 30 days to issue a decision, and that decision is what is appealed. So sometimes you won't have as many opinions from a court of common pleas judge similarly, but you'll have some. You'll also, if the candidate is a lawyer, you'll have briefs that candidate has written. Again, not necessarily reflecting that candidate's own personal viewpoint, but representing that candidate's representation of a client. But there's a lot of information out there, but it does require due diligence. I can tell you in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Bar Association also has a judicial selection and retention commission. And it actually has an app that you download for your website for the Court of Common Pleas judges, the municipal court judges. It has a very detailed, lengthy process as well for the Judicial Commission's investigation. And you can take that with you into the ballot to help you with, decide who to vote. The Montgomery County Bar Association, the Lancaster County Bar Association, also the Allegheny County Bar Association, many of the bar associations across the state on their website will list the process that they went through, in evaluating the candidates and their recommendations. I think these are valuable resources. And if we're, depending on what county you're in, since I know this is Pennsylvania, I would Google a search for that county's bar association, go on their website and see what they have done. The other important thing is that it just went in and out of my mind. I'm sorry. For the Supreme Court candidates, they aren't just sitting on the bench, as I said, issuing decisions. There are a lot of other actions that the Supreme Court judges do. So there are responsibilities. So that they are responsible for various rules committees. They are responsible for oversight of attorneys and attorney registration. They're responsible for the budgeting of the overall court system. So while we are electing judges based on their experience, we also want to know about their administrative expertise, I will say, and their involvement in the law. So, what do they feel about certain rules, proposed rule revisions, maybe proposed rule revisions with respect to bail or preliminary arraignments? Those are questions that the candidates could answer if they wanted, because it's not necessarily a case that will be before them, but it has to do with a policy change, really, a rule change. With respect to bail, for example, the Supreme Court issued proposed rules. They were put out for comment. There were many comments, went back to the Supreme Court Criminal Rules Procedure Committee, now have issued new rules, so that we want to make sure that the judges are all well-versed, I'll say, and engaged in proposed advancements or modernization or reforms for the rules. I think I've taken up a lot of time. So I'm sorry, Susan, I get carried away. I apologize.
No, that's one of the things we love about you. We need people. I mean, I just want to give a huge shout out to Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. My name's Susan Gobreski. I am a senior advisor with Pennsylvania Policy Center. I also serve as a volunteer, but on the board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. So one of the things I'm also going to share, there's another resource, the Spotlight PA resource is really incredible. It's so impressive, and thank goodness that they're doing this work. The League of Women Voters also has another resource. And so I put some links in so you can check your voting information. But here's the thing. We know that a lot of you are, I guess, what I would call the choir. Jeff, are you putting up our slideshow? Because that's the document. So a couple quick things. I just want to go back to it. Remember that when the Supreme Court of the United States issued the Dobbs decision, that kicked abortion rights down to the states. Debbie mentioned a few of these things, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania made a huge decision about redistricting. And as a result, we got a redistricting process that is more like Pennsylvania. It's still not fixed after years and years of gerrymandering. There were critical case decisions that have been made, including a 3-3 tie that ended up de facto upholding the ruling that said that undated ballots, mail ballots, can't be counted, which is just silly, because we know when the ballots get mailed out, it's not like it's a permanent form. They're mailed out each cycle. And we know when the voter mails it back. So if the voter puts the wrong date or their birth date in there or doesn't date it, it shouldn't be the case that their ballot isn't counted, but there we are. And that was because of a 3-3 ruling because of the death of Judge Max Baer. So part of the other thing that we're all here to do is both learn about the judicial races, the importance of this office, the importance, more importantly, is to the impact on all of our lives. Do we have the right to reproductive health care? What about the right to vote? What about education funding? Will our Commonwealth uphold the Constitution? But the other key issue here that I want to talk about, if you can go up to, is best practices in engaging other people. One of the things that's critical, you are the person likely that a lot of people in your life turn to for information about voting. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some best practices. There are also school board elections and county commissioner elections, and county commissioners oversee elections offices. So if you're not in Philadelphia, we have a different setup, but the rest of them have county commissioners. So from judges at the top of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to school boards, the stakes are high when it comes to the issues that affect our lives. So we want to also make sure that we want to remind people about that. We also want to help give them tools for voting. We want to make sure that it's simple and that it doesn't feel too complicated to get information. We want to empower people, and help remind them that they have an important role to play, that their neighbors are voting. Believe it or not, when you actually say, oh, hardly anyone's going to vote, we got to get out there and vote, that actually discourages people. So we really want to remind people that this is a team sport, and that we want to be out there participating, and that the people who are participating are deciding. One of the other things that you can do with the people in your life is actually help them make a plan. So ask them questions. If you just blah, blah, blah at people, you sometimes people stop. But one of the things you want to do is ask them, like, have you decided if you're going to vote by mail or if you're going to go to the in person to the polls? What time do you usually vote? Oh, well, we should talk about it afterwards. I'd love to hear your experience. Giving those people questions and drawing them out about what issues they care about, if they need any help getting information, and pulling them into it. And if you are the person that a lot of people ask, engaging in these practices is likely to increase turnout. One of the things if you remember the old commercial, you tell two friends and then they'll tell two friends and then they'll tell two friends. But think about who's on your list that you suspect might be thinking about not voting. People also over-report when it comes to voting participation. So taking a look at your own phone and who you text, and texting people like, I'm thinking a lot about the judicial races. Does anyone have any questions? Can I help get anyone information? And when are you planning to vote? Is going to be a practice that is likely to increase participation in your social circle. Research also shows that social pressure does actually help. It is a proven thing. So reminding people that not who they vote for, but whether they vote is a matter of public record, and helping people talk this through. I'm also going to cover a couple of deadlines. Actually, if you can go to the next slide, it's a summary of what I just said, the do's and don'ts for practices, helping people make a plan, really talking about values, and reinforcing that our elections are safe and secure, all important things to do. And then there are a couple of key deadlines coming up. So next week is the deadline to register, last day to register. And the last day to request a mail-in or absentee ballot is October 31st. That does actually start to get close. One of the things we might want to remind people of is that if they're doing a mail ballot at this point, whenever possible, get it directly to the post office, or to, better yet, to a drop box, or drop off it at the office. We will continue to be advocating for access tools like the expansion of drop boxes and satellite offices, because not everyone lives the same distance away from county elections offices, and continuing to advocate for the funding that we need for elections offices to run properly, and to make sure that voting is indeed convenient, accessible, safe, and secure for everybody. Election day is November 7th. That ballot can't just be mailed. If you're mailing a ballot by election day, it has to be received, or you can go vote in person. And I'm going to stop there, pause, and then we have a little time for any questions that people have. Or Mark, if you want to add anything at this point.
Oh, Susan, I forgot to mention retention elections.
Okay.
So
mention.
Okay. So there's this thing called retention elections. We have it in Pennsylvania. So our judges can be on the bench till 75. They can't. There's no term limit, but there is this 10-year term, I'll say. So when you elect a judge, initially it's for an initial 10-year term. After that 10-year term, there is this question on the ballot, which you will see when you go in. Should this judge be retained for another 10-year term? Now, the interesting thing about the retention election is that it's nonpartisan. And I say that it's nonpartisan in that when you go to the ballot, it will not say whether that judge is Democrat or Republican. And the purpose is so that you're evaluating that candidate on his or her performance. How did that judge do as a judge for the prior 10 years? How did the judge rule? How did that judge interact with the community? How did that judge get along with other judges? So you can look into the decisions by the judge by Googling, by going on the PA courts. The bar associations also evaluate the retention elections. But I just didn't want you to be surprised when you have the ballot and it says, should this judge be retained? There are those questions on there. They're not in the primary. You didn't see them, but they will be in the general. Sorry. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. You are a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and we all appreciate the fact that you have learned about all of this so the rest of us can tune in at important and critical times of year. So thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions or comments.
Again, if you have a question or comment, you can type that in the chat or just type the word question and I'll unmute your line so you can ask it directly.
The other thing that, as Mark mentioned, Pennsylvania Policy Center is a new organization. We are the affiliate of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities nationally. So we are actually also working to build our social media following, make sure that, obviously if you're here, you have some way of hearing from us, but we'd like to encourage you, if you're on Facebook, and my young adult children are not, but I still am, and as are all of my friends. So you can check out our resources on democracy at our new website, and we'd like to ask you to follow us on Facebook so that we can help continuing to provide critical information about key policy issues. And we ask you to share it. And if there are things that you want from us so that we can help you get the word out, that let us know.
Okay, well, I put in the chat, PMC is holding a appellate court candidate forum on October 24th on Tuesday. We have received lots of questions from people who have just sent us emails with questions that we will be asking the candidates. So, please come and watch. We have 300 people registered, but the more the merrier, as I say. All the candidates have been invited, and all but one has responded yes. So hopefully that one will appear.
I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, and I don't see anybody's hand up, but if maybe we got
There's one.
But there's one just from Art here. Art's with us from Northwestern Pennsylvania. Some courts have made not too good decisions. What areas would you prefer that they not be involved in?
That's an interesting question. I take it from the legal point of view. Any kind of decision that involves an interpretation of a law, the Constitution, a statute, they need to be involved in, right? But what would I think I don't have an answer for that, Susan or Mark.
So look, I'm a believer in democracy with a small
Right.
d, which means I think more decisions should be made by elected officials than by judges. But judges play a critical role in making sure that the rules of the game are fair, that our democracy is sustained, that the right to vote is sustained, that our institutions of government stay within the boundaries of the separations of powers and checks and balances. All those things are critical, and the courts are the ones who can do that and who can protect us from governors and legislators that try to keep themselves in power, despite what the people say. So that is, I think, the fundamental area where I think the courts play a role. As another area is in protecting the rights of minorities, and I think that's why I think it's so critical that we have a court that remains independent, and that it's willing to play that role, and do the job it's meant to do.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Thanks so much, Mark, for responding to the question from Art. Any other questions, comments anybody has? Feel free to also just click on the raise hand icon. We can also call on you that way if that's easier.
And while we're waiting and giving folks one last chance, we really are counting on every one of us to get out there and vote and get the handful of people in our lives that care about the right to have reproductive health care, access to reproductive health care, that care about redistricting, that care about the right to vote, about the education of our children. And even, you know, some people don't, their kids are out of school, but they care that Pennsylvania follow its own constitution, which is what the basis of the education decision was about. So I think continuing to talk about how these issues are is part of how we, and stop talking, you know, if we talk more about issues, then I think that helps to detoxify the environment that's focused on candidates and the cult of personality, and really get back to what we all care about, which is wanting to be able to make a living, have a house, have a roof over our head, feed our children, and have time to enjoy our families.
But even crime, I mean, right?
Crime, absolutely.
This court currently has a case in front of it about gun control. And so there are, you know, there are some serious issues that the Supreme Court and the other appellate courts will have to grapple with in the upcoming years. Because more and more cases are being, so the other interesting thing, I guess, in sort of following Art's question, is that more and more cases are being brought, asking the courts to interpret them. You know, is that good or is that bad? I don't have, I don't really have an opinion on that, other than I think it's good in that it's balancing the branches, right? It's what this checks and balances of our democracy is supposed to do. And so, you know, when there is this question, that the third branch, our judiciary, is able to address it. So I do think that it's, I mean, some cases they won't take it right away. I mean, you know, there was it's called a King's Bench petition. So it's also a unique method of having the Supreme Court answer a matter first without it working its way up through appeals, that during COVID, as to the governor's powers, executive powers. Okay, the Supreme Court said we're not going to address it as an initial matter. Go back through the court system with this case or with this issue and work its way up. But, you know, that's a balancing of the different branches of government and asking the judiciary to weigh in, because there is this disagreement.
And Mark, the one other thing I want to say, especially related to the democracy issue, is that everyone I know who's watching the 2024 elections is expecting there to be a heightened period of legal activity. A lot of these things are going to get litigated. There are going to be a lot of lawsuits. We saw a lot in 2020, and we expect to see a lot more. So it's another reason to make sure that the courts are filled with people that the voters believe are qualified and ready to make the decisions. Mark, you want to wrap us up?
So I just want to say two things. Even those of us who would like the courts to be a little bit more restrained have to recognize that there are a lot of people who don't want that. A lot of people on both sides, which means issues are going to come up to the courts one way or the other. And that's why it's so important that we have justices and judges who are on the side we favor. And the second thing I want to make before closing is one issue we have not talked about is climate change. There's a really important case that's going to come up in the next year. Governor Wolf ordered that the state should join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a compact of northeastern states to regulate greenhouse gases. He did that under the authority of a law that he said gave him that authority. That his interpretation of that law has been challenged. It will come up in the courts, and there will be a decision about that. So one way or the other, the court is going to rule about whether we're willing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Pennsylvania. So again, it's another critical issue where some things we most care about, like education, economic equality, climate change, abortion, as well as the fundamental issues of democracy and voting rights come before the courts. That's why we held this session. I want to thank Susan Gabreski, who's our senior advisor who works on these issues, and Deborah Gross from Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts for speaking about these issues. Thank Jeff Garris, who organized this event, and thank all of you for being here. Hope to see you again soon.